Good morning, everyone. This is Lorraine. I really had no idea that I was going to be doing another live, but things happen as they do, and sometimes it's really about going with the flow, and that's so much about what my life is about. I'm approaching my birthday next month, and the last 2 months of each year are a big time of reflection to look at my life as a whole and the different celebrations, and just having a chance to reflect on where things have gone during the course of my year, and also as it relates to my life as a whole. It's interesting. This morning I was reading, a dear friend of mine said that it's Mother's Day in the UK, and here in the United States it's in May. Yesterday I did a live video having to do with why am I so angry, and it related to the questions and comments that people had sent to me and posted as a result of coming from the full moon transmissions that I do, channeling from the Divine Heart. Today, I find myself wanting to share a little bit of my personal history because I think it relates to what I started talking about yesterday, and I can feel that that's a voice that wants to come out today, and so I'm sharing it with you, and this may strike a chord with some of you as well. When I was growing up, conversations with my parents were, we didn't talk about things, and in their generation, that's just the way that it was. And in my late 20s, and I've referred to this many times in relationship to just things that I've learned about why some of the work that I do has become so important, actually emerged from, I believe, that conversation I had with my mother that day when she came to me and told me that she didn't love my father anymore and that she was unhappy with her marriage, and she felt very trapped. And I had no words of consolation for her. And so my mother, because of the dependency that she had on my father, and my father is a very, very good man, but I think at that time she was going through a period of reflection and feeling a lot of regrets about her life and feeling that it was too late. And so it was really hard for me, as I look back at that time, to wish that I could have been someone else for her. And I did the best that I could. And I know that she always did the best that she could. She's probably around me right now as I'm sharing this with you. And so a few years later, my mother was diagnosed with leukemia. And when I received that news, I was living in New York at the time. My parents were living in Florida. And I heard the clock begin to tick. And I felt that my mother, I don't know that I understood this at the time, but it's something that I've come to believe, that my mother, in feeling trapped in her life and her unhappiness, found a way to leave by contracting leukemia. She'd been healthy all of her life. And so that really rings true for me. And so years later, I found myself working in a recovery center, and at that time I had been downloading information about the inner child just as that language was beginning to come out and books were being written. I had been downloading that for over a year and had started working with people in understanding exactly what that meant. Now oftentimes we call it shadow work. The language has changed, but it invites us to go into some of those deeper places within ourselves where we're holding wounds, where we're holding hurts and pains that have been covered up so neatly, but that can come out in so many different ways when life lines up in a way that triggers that wound. We don't always know how to work with that. And so in this space of self-reflection, I find myself thinking about my mother. And when my mother died in 1981, I was in my early 30s, and it was devastating for me to have lost her. My father died 2.5 years later, I believe, from a broken heart. And so here I was, prior to really doing any kind of inner child work, and starting to get in touch with a lot of my feelings. And over the years, what I've come to understand, what has really rang true for me, is that when we're doing some of this deeper work, and it comes up in the most perfect ways and sometimes in surprising ways, if we can allow ourselves to fully embrace all of the truth that we come face to face with. And sometimes what we discover that we're holding inside of ourselves is shocking. I remember, and some of you who have been following my journey know that I have been dealing with a cancer diagnosis actually 4 times. And when I first got that diagnosis, one of the first things that I looked at, that I was guided to look at, was the relationship that I had with my mother, because I felt intuitively that there was a connection that was very significant. And it also, one of my very dear friends asked me a question. And when she asked me that question, I burst into tears. And the question was, what do you feel guilty about? And of course, it brought me back to that conversation I had with my mother. And so, I mean, it was such a visceral connection, it was impossible to not see that there was something there. And so I, because of who I am and this journey that I'm on, that I'm so committed to heal and to be of help to others, I dug really deep into my relationship with my mother, what I had been holding, the guilt that I had been holding, the unforgiveness, the anger, and over the years have continued to unravel my own inner shadows, which is part of what's really important to me in my journey, and what I find has been such an incredible healing experience for me and the clients that I'm very blessed to work with, especially when I was working with people in a recovery center and working with addiction, some of the most courageous people I have ever been honored and blessed to work with. So it's interesting, as I'm working with people now, and a lot of parental issues, especially mother issues, are starting to come up. And again, no coincidence, I find myself thinking about my mother and feeling that there's something that I want to share that feels so important, and that is, so often when you're looking at a situation in the past, and we're looking at it from an adult's point of view, when we're growing up as children, we see things very differently. We interpret things differently, and so what matters to us and the way in which we react to things, the way in which we interpret things, are very different than the way we see it as an adult, because we've had life experiences, we have grown hopefully in some maturity, and so the things that happen to us as children, that happen to us as adults, I hope, from our own growth and our healing and our evolution, that we, where some things have been very painful for us in the past, that we are able to navigate these experiences without it becoming so traumatic and so deeply painful that we have to hold it in our hearts and in our bodies. So about 2 years ago, I was coming off of a period that I have shared, that I was so incapacitated, that I was in so much pain and felt like I was so physically crippled with the progression of cancer in my body, despite all of my efforts, despite all of my arrogance and my tools and my gifts, and I had gotten to this point where I was really at my knees, and I was having a session with a friend of mine because I felt that I needed some help. I was feeling a little too close to something, and I felt that I was at a blind spot. And she brought up my mother again, and I thought, again, more stuff with my mother. And of course, you know, there are layers to things, and I've also come to appreciate that when those layers come up, that they are blessings, and they show us something else that's really important, and we can release some of those shadows a lot easier than when we first started. We don't always have to be on the floor feeling like a puddle. They're not always gut-wrenching, but I will tell you that when this piece came up, it knocked me to my knees. I have said to people so many times when they're doing some of this inner work how important it is to honor and embrace everything that is true within your heart, even if it is upsetting. And so often when I would be working with people when they were dealing with parent stuff, and they would come back and they would say, I know they did the best they could. And that, I believe, is absolutely true, because we're coming from generations of so much wounding and so much pain that the world has not really known how to heal. Maybe some have known, most have not, in my opinion. And so it's been carried through our ancestral lineage, and many of us are doing not only our own healing, but we're also doing it for the collective and for our ancestors. This is brilliant work. So there would be the clients I was working with, and I know I felt this way myself. I know my mother did the best she could. I know my father did the best she could. And when we would be doing inner child work, one of the things that I would say to them was, your inner child at that time when there was this wound didn't give a shit whether your mother or your father was doing the best she could, because there was a need that was unmet, and that small you at that time needed that, and all she or he felt at that time was, my mother or my father isn't there, has abandoned me, whatever was interpreted. And when we stand in that place of, as adults, I know they did the best they could, we are diminishing and negating that small part of us that is still handling that wound. And so I would say to people, there's a 3-letter word that's missing here, and the word is and. I know that my mother did the best she could, and my inner child was hurt. My inner child was angry. There is a part of me that doesn't care that they did the best they could, because I'm hurting, and that hurt and that wound and that pain must be acknowledged for healing to occur. It's not an either or. It's not a negation of the love and the support of anyone who shows up in our life. But that does not diminish that we as human beings at times don't get what we need. And we need to honor that. We need to own that if we're holding pain. So here I am, I'm in this session, and this awareness comes up about my mother. And I will tell you that when it came up, not only was it shocking, but I was overwhelmed with shame and disloyalty, because what came through in my head was, you fucking coward. Because my mother, to that child part of me, didn't feel that my mother fought in order to change her life. Now, I know as an adult, she did the best she could. She didn't realize what her options were, and she didn't have the tools at that time. I sure didn't. I couldn't help her. I couldn't even help myself. I was carrying so much anger and upset and unresolved wounds within myself. But I'll tell you that as I look back at that time, there were so many gifts that came from that very painful conversation that has helped me to become the person that I am, and to be able to work with people in many ways. And so I'm grateful to her for that. But when I started realizing that, as people have said to me many times, watching my own journey with cancer, I don't know how else to walk this journey. I'm not trying to be brave. I'm not trying to be anything. I don't know how else to show up and do this healing journey other than the way that I'm doing this, because this is who I am. And when I came in touch with those feelings of guilt, because I felt that it was in me, I couldn't deny it, and it came out so fast and so loud, and I had to say it. And I'm having a session with this person who was helping me to navigate. And I didn't want to say those words for anything because I was so mortified that I had been carrying that judgment and that rage and that disappointment, and then having the guilt and the shame because I felt that way. And I had to own all of it. Because as long as I was holding all of that, it was festering inside of myself, and I was silencing that, and I was carrying that energies in my body. I know that it was impacting on my ability to heal. And so I had to say it out loud. And I screamed it. I screamed the words that were in my heart, that my child, even though my mother, I was in my 30s, it was still that child who lost her mother, who was left. And while I wished, as I became aware of carrying those words, those thoughts and those feelings, that I had felt differently, I didn't. I wish that my mother had had the courage, had been braver, had had the tools and the support and the resources that I've had wanted to live, and my child felt I wanted her to live for me. But she needed to live for herself. And she did the best she could. And I love her for that. So my dear friend Karen Lees, I know that this is Mother's Day, and I want you to know that your post has triggered that for me. And as always, I love you for the ways in which you serve me, because I didn't realize that I needed to share this with other people, that I needed to express this. I don't carry that pain in my heart for my mother, but I miss her. And I'm grateful for all the ways that she has showed up in my life. So what I say to you, if you are working with some of your shadows now, and working with some of these old wounds or parental angers and hurts and guilts and shame, you can't walk through these shadows unless you allow all of the truth to come to the surface. And some of it may be really hard to face. Some of it may feel awful. It may be scary. It may bring shame and guilt and grief. But all of that is true, because you cannot deeply love and be authentic and show up in this world without experience all of the pain and the joys of life, and all of the feelings that come with that. And so I invite you to love yourself enough. I'm going to say it that way, to love yourself enough to look deep when you know you need to silence and censor nothing. And if you need help to go into those places, get that help. Give yourself that love. I felt a sense of my mother around that day, as if she needed me to say that, say those awful words, those truth-telling words. I know it freed me, and I believe that it freed me to love her more, to love myself more. And I know that as my journey has continued, I've gotten stronger and stronger, with so much support and love and assistance. It has opened up my heart. And it's love that is the greatest healer of all. And sometimes in that love, we find some of these other feelings. I'm not going to call them negative feelings. I'm not going to call them darker feelings, because feelings are just feelings. But in order to rise to the greatest version of ourselves, we have to be willing to look at the lies and the deceptions and the stories and all the ways that we package things to make them look nice, so that we can not have to deal with them, or not have to look at them, or not have to feel bad about ourselves. And it's not about feeling bad about yourself. It's about embracing your humanness And I come back to that word and again. I've done the best that I could, and there have been times in my life when it has been my wounds, it has been my arrogance, it has been my not knowing, not trusting, a lot of my humanness that has led the way. And I embrace all of that. So I don't know what else that I'm feeling guided to say right now. I see so many of you have joined me, and I thank you for sharing your space, your heart, your presence with me. And I wish you a day that matters, a day that honors your soul, that honors your humanness, that honors your heart, and to continue to invite you to be willing to be vulnerable, to be willing to embrace the messiness of your humanity, to give your inner child lots of space for her voice to be heard, his voice to be heard, to censor nothing, so that the wholeness of who we truly are can continue to emerge, can continue to have its voice. We need to give ourselves permission to tell the truth. It truly does set us free, and I believe that it gives permission to so many others who may be holding back some of what they have not dared to express, what they have felt guilty about feeling. It's all okay. It's all real. And that's where the healing is. That's where the love reaches. My child thanks you for joining me today. And I send you so much love. Have a wonderful day.